We begin with issue number one for voters in the U.S., the economy. Vice President Kamala Harris just laid out her proposals aimed at helping struggling Americans pay their bills, a pitch she made in the battleground state of North Carolina. CNN's Eva McKend is on the scene for us, joining us live from Raleigh right now. Eva, break down today's speech, what it means.
Wolf, this speech was quite significant because this is the first time that we heard the vice president outline her concrete economic policy goals. A Harris administration would go after price gougers. A Harris administration would aggressively pursue increasing the child tax credit from $2,000 to $3,600, $6,000 for low-income families, middle-class families. Perhaps the loudest applause line came when she pledged to pursue $25,000 for first-time home buyers. But Wolf, what was also significant is how she framed this conversation in deeply personal terms, talking about how significant it was in her own life when her mother could finally afford to buy a home, talking about how she understood what it was like when you have to stretch those dollars in order to buy groceries. She also recalled working at McDonald's as a young person and seeing her then colleagues try to make that money work to raise families. Take a listen to how she is framing this conversation.
If you want to know who someone cares about, look who they fight for. Donald Trump fights for billionaires and large corporations. I will fight to give money back to working and middle-class Americans.
And so conservatives already lining up to dismiss these policy proposals as socialist. It is worth noting, Wolf, that many of the proposals would require a future President Harris to work in concert with Congress, and that Democrats have in the past offered a lot of these policies but had difficulty ultimately getting them over the finish line. Wolf.
Eva McKend in North Carolina for us. Eva, thank you very much for that report. I want to get some more on all of this. Our panel of political experts is joining us right now. Jeff Zeleny, this was a populist economic message from the vice president, even separating herself from President Biden's policies in some ways. Talk a little bit about that.
Wolf, it definitely was economic populism, but also it really struck me that this is really the first time we're seeing her making her case against Donald Trump through the idea of policies. So for all this talk, for really the last several months, is this going to be a referendum on the Biden administration or a choice with the former president? And she is trying to draw a sharp contrast with the policies of a potential new administration for the former president and what she would do. Now, she embraced the Biden policies to a point, but she also focused much more on trying to bring down the cost of housing, the cost of food. Now, there weren't a ton of specifics here, but this is a presidential campaign. She was laying out her vision. She certainly stopped well short of saying how she would specifically pay for any of this, but she really went after the Trump specific policies on the economy. And he has inflationary policies. There's no question about it. So trying to blunt the own sort of backlash on the and blaming the inflation on the Biden administration and trying to flip the script a little bit. So it was pretty fascinating in terms of drawing that a contrast. But perhaps more than anything, just weaving in her life stories, working at a McDonald's, talking about that American dream when her mother was able to buy their first home, and remembering what that felt like. That is what these policy speeches are about. I mean, it's a reminder. Most Americans still don't know that much about her. So she's clearly trying to use even speeches like this to fill in some of the blanks.
Yeah, that's really important, too. Megan Hayes is with us. Megan, the vice president didn't release new details on how she's going to help pay for all these new proposals. Is that a mistake?
No, I don't think so. I think that people want to see what her hopes are and her vision is for moving into a Harris administration. I think that, just like Jeff was saying, that she's building upon the Biden administration success that they've had and then going a little bit further into housing, into cutting costs for groceries. So I think that people just see the vision and are hopeful, and they just want to see how that she is thinking of a plan and is going to move that into the future.
Matt Gorman, do you think a speech like this one steals some of Trump's populist thunder?
I don't think it steals it. I think one of the commonalities is we're hearing both some more populist rhetoric from the right and the left nowadays, certainly with J.D. Vance now on the ticket as well. I think a couple things. I think number one, over the last several, weeks, Kamala's taken care to try and flip-flop on so many of her positions she took in the 2020 presidential race through kind of anonymous aides moderating those things. But this first policy thing goes pretty far left. I think that was a notable shift. And also, if you were kind of blacked out for the last 4 years, you would think that she was the challenger. She was the incumbent vice president of the United States. There wasn't a lot of talk about, let's face it, a lot of the crises with inflation and housing happened during the Biden-Harris administration. There's a little bit of memory holding of that I took note of during the speech as well.
Kristen Holmes, Vice President Harris also went after Trump's ability to stay on message when he visited North Carolina recently. Listen and watch this.
2 days ago, Donald Trump was here in North Carolina. He said he was going to talk about the economy. I think you all watched. You know what I'm about to say. But he offered no serious plans to reduce costs for middle-class families. No plan to expand access to housing or health care. And that, actually, I think for most of us, was not surprising.
Kristen, how is the Trump campaign reacting to these comments and the populist economic agenda Vice President Harris is now laying out?
Well, they're obviously attacking her. They've said that she's gone full-blown communist. At one point, they said she has a Soviet-style price control scheme. But one thing was clear in their attacking of her, and it's what we're going to see. And actually, Matt kind of made the point for me, because we're hearing this in Republican talking points as well as from the administration, is that they are essentially laying this out as, if this is her policy, then why isn't she starting on it now? Their entire goal is to try and paint her as an incumbent whose policies are unpopular. We obviously know from polling that we saw for months when President Joe Biden was at the top of the ticket that Donald Trump polls ahead of Kamala Harris on the ahead of Joe Biden on the economy. They believe that she can also poll ahead of Kamala Harris if he continues this messaging. Now, she is right. There were not a lot of policy details in his speech, but the one thing that he has continued to double down on and what they hope gets through to voters is this idea of, were you better off under my administration, when inflation was lower, when interest rates were lower? And that's what he's really trying to hammer home. Now, if people start requesting more details, we obviously have asked for more details on how exactly he would try and get inflation back down. But if he puts that out, we're keeping an eye on it. But right now, the policy really messaging has been, again, I did it once, weren't you happier then? Not particularly detail focused.
Interesting. Jeff, as Kristen is reporting, the Trump campaign says Harris went, and I'm quoting now, full communist with her agenda. How are attacks like this likely to land with voters out there?
Well, look, I think it depends which voters. I mean, for the Republican base, it definitely will be music to their ears and fire them up. But those aren't necessarily the voters that matter the most. They're the independent voters in the middle. And now there definitely is a new presidential race upon us here. And she's walking a very fine line by trying to embrace some of the Biden-Harris record and also trying to draw a contrast with what the former president is proposing. So what independent voters are looking for is perhaps change. Almost every election, Wolf, is a change election. And suddenly, change is also on the side of the Democrats. It certainly wasn't with President Biden at the top of the ticket. So she owns the record of the administration, but she also has the unique ability to present something forward, present something new. So that is what voters are going to have to sort out here. But I think the contrast was very, very stark. And this is something we've not seen actually in about 24 years or so. When Al Gore, of course, was running, he embraced some elements of the Clinton administration, but also tried to move on and pivot. Since then, we've not seen a vice president running while the president is still in office. So it's going to be a fascinating exercise to see how voters sort through all of this. But the specific things of a communism, I'm not sure those land very well with voters in the middle of this who simply want something to be done by Washington here. So a very interesting speech that just began putting some meat on these policy bones.
In our Money Lead this week, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris showered us with very big promises about how they will help the economy, even if this sort of goes on details on how and whether those promises will actually work. So we've asked a pair of experts to debate what both presidential candidates are actually promising. Stephen Moore, when you ask the former president or his team about his inflation plan, they talk about energy prices. Drill, baby, drill, to steal the parlance of, goodness, maybe 2010 Republicans. Even leaving climate change aside, which is ignoring a lot, I guess my question with this always is, the U.S. is already a top gas producer and oil producer. They don't drive global oil prices in isolation. What do they mean here?
Is that for me?
Yes, Steve, please.
Okay, sure. So look, we were completely energy independent when Trump was president. We were really proud of the fact that, you know, we had achieved something that we hadn't achieved in 50 years. We weren't dependent on Russia, or we weren't dependent on OPEC. In fact, OPEC, we didn't even talk about OPEC was president. Now, you're right, we are producing a record amount of oil today, but guess what? That's because the price of oil is about 40% more expensive than it was when Trump was president. So our analysis shows we'd be producing about 3 or 4 million more barrels a day with a pro-drilling policy that builds the pipelines and the infrastructure, the leasing that we need, so we could be energy dominant again. And I do agree with Trump. If we had stuck with that policy, I don't think you'd see Russian tanks in Ukraine today.
Catherine, the vice president, a focal point of what? Please, yeah.
Sorry, can I just amend that?
Yes.
Because a lot of it's wrong. We are energy independent today. If you are measuring energy independence by the fact that we are exporting more oil than we are importing. In fact, we've been such for over 2 years, the longest stretch in American history. And that was the metric by which Trump and supporters like Stephen Moore referred to energy independence when Trump was in office, which we briefly had and we've now had for longer under Biden. I don't think either president, to be clear, controls the oil spigot, but we are now producing more oil today in this country than any other country on earth has ever produced. Not only that, we also have record production of natural gas, of solar, of wind, record battery production, storage capacity. So the idea that there's some sort of war on American energy is just bogus. All of those things have been going up under Biden. In fact, he's approved more drilling permits on federal lands than Trump did. So there's this narrative out there that is just completely false, that Biden has somehow turned off the oil spigot.
Catherine, then explain why it is that gasoline is 45% more expensive today at the gas pump. That's what Americans care about. We should be producing. No, we should be producing. We could be producing 3 or 4.
Do you know a good way to get gas prices down? Do you know a good way to get gas prices down? Have a global pandemic and have everybody stay at home. That is why gas prices plummeted in 2020. That is 100% why. That's why oil prices were negative briefly in 2020. We had a pandemic.
Catherine, even before the pandemic, the price of gas was about 40% cheaper than it is today.
And also the overall CPI has increased.
Go ahead.
Hold on. Have you told all your green friends that we're producing record amounts of oil and gas? I thought the idea for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden was net zero, and now you're having it both ways.
I don't represent Joe Biden. I don't represent Joe Biden. I know you represent Donald Trump. I know you're a surrogate for Donald Trump. I don't represent any political candidate. I have written many times about the record oil production.
Guys, hang on one second.
What I'm saying, though, is that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are talking out of two sides of their mouth. They're telling all their environmental friends, we're going to eliminate fossil fuels. And then on the other hand, they're saying, we're producing record amounts of it. You can't have it both ways.
No.
It has been a complicated balancing act.
Those are what the facts are.
Yeah, no, I do want to ask you though, Catherine, because you make a good point. You have been sharply critical of the Biden administration and some of the Harris proposals when you feel like it's merited. One of them being what has been a focal point of what they've been talking about this week, which is a quote unquote federal ban on price gouging. Donald Trump has called it communist, as prices will come down quickly if he's elected. I think I'm trying to think in economic history, which you both know far better than me, but I think yesterday was the 53rd anniversary of President Nixon announcing federal wage and price controls. Didn't work. Catherine, the kind of validity of this proposal? Is it something that could work?
I mean, I don't exactly know what she's even proposing with this anti-price gouging idea. Nobody can define price gouging. It's like porn. I know it when I see it, as the famous line goes, which is part of the problem here. So we don't really know what she's proposing. The fact sheet that that the campaign put out a few days ago had a lot of things that I found quite disturbing, that indicated the template for this proposal would be something like the legislation Kamala Harris sponsored in 2020 with Elizabeth Warren, and that Elizabeth Warren has since reintroduced this year in a slightly different form, that would essentially look like price controls. If you listen to what Kamala Harris said today in her speech, it was actually, frankly, much more restrained and much more toned down than what the campaign had put out a few days ago, which gives me hope that maybe they're not going to go down this very bad and silly path, which, as you point out, has been very harmful in other countries that implemented price controls. But we don't know what this is going to look like. I would love to see more details, hint, hint, campaign, if you're willing to share them.
Steve, can I ask on this issue of grocery prices? We saw the former president was flanked by groceries yesterday. His team thinks that this is a really winning contrast message for them. What's his plan? Is there a plan to bring down grocery prices?
Well, yeah, I mean, we just do what Trump did in his first term. And let's not forget, Bill, that if you look at Trump's record on inflation, when he left office, the inflation rate was 1.5%. And then 18 months later, after Biden and Harris spent $5 trillion, we had a 9% inflation rate. And so it's obvious that if you care about inflation and bringing prices down, Trump has a much better record. In fact, the average inflation rate under Trump in his 4 years in office was 1.9%, which is actually below what the Fed wants as a target. Meanwhile, under Harris and Biden, you've had an average inflation rate of 6.5%. And the reason that's important, by the way, I think the reason that Harris is fighting back on this is because the average American has lost $2,000 of income since Biden came into office. That's a big loss.
This is something we should block a full hour off for you guys to go back and forth there, because I know I could see Catherine. Catherine was ready to rock and roll about supply chain issues, the spending from the Trump administration.
Well, and also what Donald Trump actually has proposed on prices, which would cause them to go up.
We're going to have to do this.
I'm
pitching this to everyone at this point. Catherine and Stephen, always love Justice Potter Stewart Friday references. Thank you guys for the lively debate.
We're getting new reaction now to the economic speech delivered today by Vice President Kamala Harris from someone who was there, the Democratic governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper. The governor is joining us right now. Governor, thanks so much for joining us. This is some of what Vice President Harris proposed today. A ban on price gouging for groceries and food, a $25,000 subsidy for first-time home buyers, and expanding the child tax credit. Governor, is it a wise move from the Harris campaign to embrace these sort of economic populism ideas? And do you worry about the unintended consequences?
It's absolutely a good idea. And in fact, Wolf, the vice president deserves some credit for the fact the United States has the strongest economy in the world. Unemployment is low, the stock market is high, record job growth, inflation is now cooling. She also gets credit for the generational investments that this administration has made to connect people to high-speed internet and to repair our infrastructure and to lower prescription drug prices. But she is well aware that everyday families are paying too much for groceries and for housing, and that they're frustrated with the cost of living. I think this is her effort to move forward with the plan here. And instead of Donald Trump's tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy, we're going to provide some tax credits, bringing back the very popular child tax credit, because diapers cost money and food costs money. And I think this price gouging idea, for the fact that it can serve as a real deterrent for high prices. We've seen price gouging laws work during disasters. She and I both served as attorneys general. We find that when we have these laws in place, companies are afraid to charge excessively high prices. So you can be a capitalist and still work to prevent people from getting ripped off. I think those were common sense proposals that she made today.
The Trump campaign immediately reacted, saying that Vice President Harris went, and I'm quoting them now, full communist with this economic agenda. The economic columnist Catherine Rampell writing in an op-ed for the Washington Post this, and I'm quoting, "If your opponent claims you're a communist, maybe don't start with an economic agenda that can accurately be labeled as federal price controls. We already have plenty of economic gibberish coming from the Republican presidential ticket. Do we really need more from the other side too?" End quote. How do you respond to that, Governor?
J.D. Vance complained that Kamala Harris was copying Donald Trump here. Look, this is about being fair to working people. They have concentrated so much on trying to help the wealthy. What Kamala Harris is trying to do is to pull it back to the center. Those are ridiculous charges. She believes in developing business. Look at the job growth. Look at the companies that are expanding all across this country, creating American jobs. What she's trying to do is to make things more fair for everyday working people. I think these are common sense proposals. Obviously, when you work through Congress, you make compromises here and there. You can end up with a good product if you go in strong with something like this. And I believe that when she becomes president of the United States, she could do that.
One political question, I'm just curious. You actually pulled out of consideration to become Kamala Harris's vice presidential running mate before she made her selection. Here's the question, why? Wouldn't you have given Democrats a better chance to win North Carolina if you were on the ticket?
Tim Walz is the perfect vice presidential nominee for Kamala Harris and for this country. He's a smart, strong leader. He says what he thinks. People like to be around him. He has helped generate a lot of excitement for this ticket. Look, it just wasn't the right time for me or my state, but I am full 100% in for Kamala Harris. Already, the polls are very tight in North Carolina. I said earlier today, I have that 2008 feeling, and people in North Carolina know what that means. That's the last time we voted for a Democratic presidential nominee, Barack Obama. I have that same feeling now. I'm getting that vibe from voters that they want to make history again. So we're excited here in North Carolina to be able to give her those 16 electoral votes. If Kamala Harris wins North Carolina, she is the next president of the United States. And I believe we have everything in place where we can make that happen.
Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump have never stood face to face in the same room. The debate expected to change that. It might be the first time that happens, and it is promising to be a battle royale because we are learning new details about the preparations for their big showdown. Several sources confirming to CNN that the Harris campaign has asked longtime Hillary Clinton aide Philippe Reines to help Harris get ready. The New York Times reporting he was seen attending a mock debate prep session this week dressed as Donald Trump. It's something he also did to help Clinton prepare in 2016, a role he's talked about playing.
I went to my tailor and I said, I need to actually look like Donald Trump. He gave me a suit too baggy, the sleeves were too long. I bought 3¼ inch lifts in my shoes because, you know, he's like 6'6", 6'7". I didn't wear a wig because it was not SNL. This was my process. It was method acting. I wanted to be him.
Alrighty then, out front now, two men who know all about preparing for big debates, David Axelrod and Stuart Stevens. They were on opposite sides in 2012 with the Obama and Romney campaigns. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here tonight. David, what does Harris, turning to Philippe Reines, tell you about how she is approaching this huge debate?
Well, if it's method acting, I hope there's a madness to his method because that would make the thing more authentic. Look, the idea of debate prep is to anticipate everything that might happen, to game out how you're going to handle it, and to come in there with a strategy for what you want to communicate, a narrative, a story that you want to tell through this debate that you hope will prevail. So prep is all about anticipating circumstances and giving the candidate a sense of what they are going to face on that stage. Oftentimes, and this was true before the Biden, but in our debate prep, I don't know how Stuart handled his, but we did create a kind of mock stage that looked exactly like the one that they were going to debate on and so on. So you want to create those circumstances, and you want the candidate to hear the kind of attacks and the kind of thrusts that they may hear on that debate stage so that you can work off of them and work through your answers.
Stuart, just jumping off of that, I mean, what do you think the top goals should be for Kamala Harris in these sessions? She's going to have to be quick with comebacks, which is something that I'm sure is practiced in those mock debates.
Look, if I was in debate prep with Vice President Harris, I would tell her to prosecute Donald Trump. That's her strong suit. He's a criminal. She's a prosecutor. Those are the facts. This has never happened before in American history, that a guy who is an actual criminal is standing up as a nominee of a major party. So I wouldn't worry about any of this stuff about being likable, about being relatable. I would just prosecute Donald Trump. And I think he won't be able to deal with it. He doesn't like women. He particularly doesn't like powerful black women. And I think that's the way to put him on the defensive from the very first.
David, we have heard previews of how Trump may attack Harris to say Harris, as the current VP, is to blame for any of the bad policies of the last 3.5 years. It is an attack that was used against then President Obama. As you well remember, in a debate, he even admits that he lost. Take a listen.
In my view, the president should have grabbed it. If he wanted to make some adjustments to it, take it, go to Congress, fight for it.
That's what we've done. Made some adjustments to it, and we're putting it forward before Congress right now. A $4 trillion plan.
But you've been president 4 years. You've been president 4 years. Right. You said you cut the deficit in half. It's now 4 years later. We still have trillion-dollar deficits.
All right, so how should Harris answer a line of attack like that from Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, let me give Stuart plaudits because they did win that first debate, and partly they won that first debate because presidents always tend to want to be more defensive, want to explain, and partly because Romney wisely sort of changed his tenor and tone from the guy we saw in the primaries. And we honestly didn't prep adequately for the Romney who appeared on the stage, who was, I think, very comfortable with what he was saying and was much more like the guy that I've come to know, a more center-right, moderate Republican. But here, back to your question. Listen, they're doing what I think strategically, it's probably the right thing to try and make her the incumbent. I heard Kristen say that at the top. That's absolutely right. They want to make her Joe Biden in this race and make her bear the burden of some of the things that people associated with Biden in policy that they don't like or in the results that they don't like. Here's the problem. I mean, we don't talk about the policies of the Pence administration. Donald Trump was not assigning his policies to Mike Pence when Mike Pence was running against him in the primary campaign. And I think it's a hard sell to tell people she was actually making all of these decisions. By the way, at the same time that you're telling people that she's dumb, she doesn't know what she's doing, and so on. But that is what they have to do. The question I have is, can Donald Trump stick to a strategy? He seems completely undone right now. Yesterday, he was going out to do a part of what they want to do in this debate around the economy. And when it got to questions, he just went off like a Roman candle, complaining about these about these trials and about these indictments and about the injustice of it all. And I would be really worried about that if I were his team. I disagree with Stuart, by the way. I don't think she needs to prosecute him as her prime task, because I think a lot of the case against Trump is clear to people. What they want to know is that there is an acceptable alternative. They don't know Kamala Harris. They don't know most vice presidents very well. They don't know Kamala Harris. This is an opportunity for her to talk to the American people. And yes, there'll be some back and forth with Trump, but there is a real imperative here, which is to really connect with the American people around where she wants to take the country in the future, because she wants to be the turn the page candidate. And this is her chance to show it.
Stuart, we saw what happened at NEBJ when Donald Trump was pressed on very tough questions. Do you worry, should Republicans be worried about her pressing his buttons and getting him to go off like a Roman candle, as we just heard described here?
Yeah, of course they ought to be worried. They ought to be panicked. You know, as Hillary Clinton said, a guy who can be baited by a tweet shouldn't be president. He was president and he was a disaster. So look, Donald Trump, they just filed a cease and desist letter, the campaign did, against an ad the Lincoln Project was running in Mar-a-Lago. I mean, that's the level that they're on. He's the most predictable guy you can imagine. He's the person you can bait. He chases every dog that chases every car. And I think that the guy is just doesn't have any idea of why he wants to be president, except he wants to be president. And I don't think he's going to do very well in this debate.